Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, February 24th, 2022, and today we're going to be taking a look at the state of Pennsylvania. Now, you might be tired about hearing from me about redistricting and the process of it all, but I promise you there are just very few states left to go. If you take a look at our national overview, which I can show you right now, there are just very few remaining states. We literally have some hard hitters: Florida, Ohio, Missouri, Wisconsin, and then a few less, New Hampshire, and the state of Louisiana. And beyond that, the rest of the states have already solidified their brand new maps for at least 2022. The state of North Carolina is expected to redistrict following the 2022 midterm elections, but beyond that, what we are looking at here is that the congressional maps have pretty much been solidified in nearly every single state that matters. And looking at the state of Pennsylvania now solidifying their brand new map, it brings news that sort of bodes well for both political parties. The Democratic Party more than anything, but this is just my main takeaway from this generic map that has been put forth. Now, if you're wondering what happened in the state of Pennsylvania, the Republican Party currently controls the state legislature, which means that they would have control over the redistricting process. That's if they did not lose the governorship back in 2018. The state of Pennsylvania in 2018 went to the Democratic Party by a pretty substantial amount. If you want to go take a look at the margin here, Tom Wolf as the incumbent defeated Scott Wagner by a margin of 17.1. Tom Wolf was first elected back in 2014 when he was able to win in the state of Pennsylvania by 9.9% against Tom Corbett because of the fact that Corbett was just simply so unpopular. The Republican Party actually elected Corbett first in the year 2010 by a 9-point margin, and 2014 should have been a cakewalk considering the national environment. Neighboring Maryland went for Larry Hogan by 3.8, despite being a state that voted for Obama by over 25 percentage points. Massachusetts also went red by a margin of 1.9. It was a pretty substantial turnaround, and voters across the nation voted to the right, flipping states such as Michigan and Massachusetts and, even Maine. You saw Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois go red. You saw Iowa, Ohio go red by substantial margins. Florida went red, Georgia went red, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada. Nearly every single state that mattered went red, except for the state of Pennsylvania, which went blue. So when it won for Tom Wolf by a margin of 17.1 in 2018, the Republican Party knew they were in for a fight when it came down to the brand new states. And initially, what we actually saw was this leaked plan called the preliminary draft. Now, this was actually written by Republican State Representative Seth Grove, and this map was leaked and, released to the press. And what this map had done, and I don't know what's happening here, I've tried figuring out what the glitch is, why my font is showing up white instead of black on the bottom half of the screen here. I'm not entirely sure why, but we're going to have to stick through it. What we found was that the Republican Party wanted to put forth a map that was, different from the old map. What it did was cracked Harrisburg and made it so there was no competitive district within this region. You can literally see them crack the entire city in an effort to capture in some Democratic voters and throw them into a mix of rural voters, really diluting the interests of this city altogether. And what it did was turn Connor Lamb's seat into a partisan seat, and from what was a Republican +2 leaning district to a Republican +10 district. It shored up some of the Democratic incumbents and made all 5 of the incumbents here solid seats, but it turned actually an additional 6th district into a toss-up district. This was not a toss-up before, it was Democrat +10. And the neighboring 7th district became Republican +3, what was even, and the 1st district became even, what was a Democrat +1 leaning seat. So the intentional effort here in Matt Cartwright's district was turned into a Republican +13, up from Republican +9. What was done intentionally was to reduce the amount of competitive seats, reduce the amount of Democratic representation from the state of Pennsylvania, despite it being a state that voted for Joe Biden in the 2020 election by 1.2. So when Republicans put forth maps such as this, an additional map that was also released, again cracking Harrisburg, just turning these districts back into more solidly Republican ones, what we found that happened here was that the Democratic Party was vehemently opposed. The Republican map was never going to go through, and Democrats countered it by putting forth their own map, which we knew was never going to pass because Democrats simply don't have control of the state legislature. Taking a look at what they did, they solidified some of these districts and actually turned the 1st district, which has a Republican, into a Democrat +6 seat, which arguably would still probably go there, but it just, kept it in a more safer position. And also what you saw was that Connor Lamb and Mike Doyle were put into not necessarily better positions. Mike Doyle was in a Democrat +26 seat that turns into a Democrat +10. Connor Lamb actually actually gets the benefit of that, turns into a Democrat plus 6 seat, and they turn the 10th district into a more competitive district. And I would actually argue that this map is a bit fairer from the older map. I would say the Republican map definitely misrepresents the state of Pennsylvania when it comes down to a proportional delegation. Forgetting state geography, which of course is an important part of redistricting, the Democratic map I do think is a bit fairer in terms of representation. But again, I'm not the one making that decision. And the person who is making that decision is the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court. The Pennsylvania State Supreme Court decided to move forward with this brand new map, and this brand new map was one that was written out and submitted all together, and they chose from all of those submissions. If you want to know what actually happened here, the courts realized that a decision was not going to be made, so they decided they were going to run through any one of these maps. Everyone was able to propose a map that wanted one to be evaluated, and the courts went through every single one of them. They ended up deciding on one that was, in their eyes, the fairest of them all. And the Supreme Court voted in a 4-3 decision down party lines that the Carter map, which we can actually find, I don't believe it is in here anymore. I believe they must have moved it up. Mark Elias, who has been a champion for Democrats in the redistricting process altogether, he actually had someone draw this map, and this map ended up being picked by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And this map, while not necessarily a gerrymander for Democrats, because that's not the point of Mark Elias's work, but more so a fair map. And this truly is one of the fairer maps of the entire list that could have been chosen. It takes into account state geography, making sure that rural interests are represented in Washington, D.C., in addition to state proportionality. When you take a look at this map, what this does is give Democrats 9 out of the 17 districts. It gives Republicans 8. Considering that Joe Biden won the last election in Pennsylvania by 1.2, this is probably the fairest map. There are 17 districts in the state of Pennsylvania, and it is simply going to be impossible to make it a tie. So, looking at the districts that have been drawn, the map actually matches up to a bit of proportionality. Now, this map could have been much worse for the Democratic Party. It could have been very similar to the ones that have been put forth. Had there been a Republican governor here, you would have seen an extremely gerrymandered map. In fact, the state of Pennsylvania is not necessarily too foreign to gerrymandered maps. Prior to the 2018 midterms, the state of Pennsylvania had a super insane gerrymander. In 2016, the state of Pennsylvania voted with the GOP in the statewide popular vote by 54% to 46%, meaning a 6-point victory for the GOP. The 6-point victory ultimately resulted in 13 seats for the Republican Party and just 5 for the Democrats. Just 5 seats. What you were seeing here was just a completely unfair split delegation, where the Republican Party was nearly getting, two-thirds of the more than two-thirds of the entire state's representation, despite it only being a state that voted with the GOP by 6%. It was just a completely unfair map, and the courts decided that you need to redraw, the same way they decided with the statewide proposals. And that court-ordered redraw actually tied the Democrats. It turned Pennsylvania back into what it is known now as a swing state, as a state that has a split delegation, Republicans and Democrats equally aligned. Now, one could argue that this map doesn't actually do the Democratic Party justice. In 2018, the Democratic Party won 11% more of the vote, 10% more of the vote than the Republican Party did when it came down to the statewide vote. So this map actually underrepresents Democratic voices. But in 2020, the Democratic Party was still able to hold on to 9-9, despite the popular vote in the state of Pennsylvania being the GOP victory of about 1 percentage point. So what you found here was that actually it was a 10-point swing when it came down to the national popular vote, the statewide popular vote, but the state of Pennsylvania still matched 9-9. Very, very impressive for the map itself to hold up under very different circumstances statewide. Now, the state of Pennsylvania, like I said, is not necessarily new to GOP gerrymanders. The map in the year 2000 was drawn to be a GOP gerrymander. What you find here is that they drew all the Democrats in one singular district here. I mean, just look at how crazy this district is drawn. It was a complete unfair map, and it was one that actually stuck through for the 10 years. What you take a look at here is that the 12-7 map gave the Democratic Party just very few seats. In 2014, they solidified them up, and in 2006, they were actually able to flip it. Now, this is very similar to what we see in many states where a statewide shift and a nationwide shift is enough to overcome some gerrymandered maps. And this eventually turned into what people would call a dummy mander. It turns into a map that was initially meant to be a gerrymander for a certain political party that resulted in the opposition party actually ending up winning. The state of Arkansas is a perfect example of that. And, we're not going to talk much about that, but that is what a dummy mander actually is. In 2008, when Obama was able to practically win by a super large margin, win the state of Pennsylvania at poll closings, the Democrats won 12-7. But then 2010 came around and the GOP was back on top. The Democrats being them, nearly lost districts that they were winning in by 20 plus percentage points. Then came 2012, and the map itself turned into a more aggressive GOP gerrymander. Republicans axed Democratic seats, and they added Republican seats. And then came 2016, when it was forced to be redrawn, and now we're back to normal. So the state of Pennsylvania actually lucked out. They did not get a second round of a GOP gerrymander, and in fact, this map, again, is one of the fairest maps that we have. The Republican Party has called this a gerrymander, saying that it is unfair that there are, 9 Biden districts, but at the end of the day, Biden did win the state. This is probably the second fairest map, besides the state of Michigan, that we've seen released in our timeline here for redistricting. In fact, maybe some would argue that it is the fairest map. I think that what I capture from the state of Pennsylvania is that this map is one that does adequately represent the interests of voters in the state. I mean, you simply cannot argue with that point. The voters in Pennsylvania voted for Biden by 1. They voted for Trump by 1. This is a state that will end up with the Republican Party in the advantage in some years and the Democratic Party in the advantage in others. And I think that is just the fairest way, we are going to be going about it. Moving forward, I think Pennsylvania will stand as probably one of the few examples of how going to the courts can actually end up drawing a super fair map. The only other examples, I think, are North Carolina and potentially Ohio. Many other court cases that have gone through have still resulted in some type of gerrymander. Pennsylvania, I think, is really a shining star for the Democratic Party and for court wins and for even the Republican Party if you're talking about fairness of maps. One thing that I do want to say in terms of an analysis of this map is that the Democratic Party is probably going to lose a bunch of these seats in 2022. The map could very well end up, truly speaking, with the Republican Party at 13-4. And I know that seems unfair. I know that seems like it is a map that just simply shouldn't be happening. But to be fair, if Democrats were to have a year like 2018 with the suburban continued shift away from the Republican Party, you could actually end up with the Republican Party in a position where the Democrats are 11-6. It's not as, lopsided. It's not as unfair, but, looking at it from an analytical point of view, Democrats probably aren't going to end up 13-4 anyways. The districts that are truly competitive are the 7th District, the 1st District, and the 17th. Now, Brian Fitzpatrick has been able to overcome many, many boundaries, many barriers to his reelection. This was a Democrat plus 1 partisan lean. Looking at Brian Fitzpatrick's victory in 2020, I mean, he did pretty well. Taking a look at this House seat here, let's go ahead and see if we can zoom in to the Brian Fitzpatrick district. He won by over 10 points. Keep in mind, this is a Biden district. This is a district that Joe Biden won, and yet Brian Fitzpatrick, being such a popular Republican, was able to win by such a substantial amount. But this district only shifted over by about 1 percentage point. I have no doubt in my mind that he will be able to win there, but in a future year, where there is no victory here for a GOP, where there is no incumbent, this district will go blue. Add that to the Democratic column. The 7th District here, I think Susan Wild is probably gone. This is a Republican plus 4 district. What was even before now is even more conservative. Matt Cartwright is probably gone as well. Republican plus 8 previously was Republican plus 9, really only held on because he was able to remain popular, did not hold on by a lot at all. In 2018, he was able to win by 9.3, then came 2020. I mean, you're talking about a super significant shift towards the right, and it'll only continue in 2022. The 17th District, this is Connor Lamb's district. The Democrats no longer have an incumbent here. Connor Lamb is more than likely going to be the Democratic nominee for Senate. You already saw a super substantial, change. In 2018, it went to Connor Lamb by 12.5. In 2020, he only ended up winning by 2.3. Very interesting to say the least. So what I think from here is that 2022, this map will benefit the Republican Party. Moving beyond that, if Democrats can have a wave year in 24, and 26, 28, or 2030, they will benefit from this. This map is truly one of the more bipartisan maps, and it fairly goes down the aisle. Republican, Democrat, and it depends on the national environment. The state of Pennsylvania, I would say, the reason why this map is good for the Democratic Party in the meantime is because it removes a Republican seat entirely. I mean, it removes one from the entire environment. I believe there is 2 Republicans drawn together right here in the 9th District, and it is a solid Republican district, so it really comes down to who wins this primary. Based off of the region, I think it will be Fred Keller, but again, that's just a discussion for another video. The Democratic Party does benefit because it removes a Republican district, but right now that isn't necessarily the make or break when it comes down to the House of Representatives. The way the Democratic Party does actually benefit from this map is that it wasn't a GOP gerrymander. With the Republican Party advantage in the Pennsylvania State Senate and the Pennsylvania State House, it could have been. It could have been. And the courts could have ruled in their favor had the courts been composed of different members of that entire court delegation. A 4-3 party vote was what gave the Democratic Party a fair map. It didn't give them a map that was, gerrymandered. It didn't give them a map that gave the Democrats an advantage, but it did give them one that they would be able to win in the future. One thing that I will say, and I didn't talk about much in this video or at all, is the state legislature. The Pennsylvania maps are much fairer now. The Pennsylvania state legislature and the state senate maps are fair. They draw a 25-25 split for, Biden to Trump. The state house is, Democrats at, I believe, somewhere around, one seat in the advantage based off Biden's victory. The maps have been drawn as fair as they can be, and I think that that is a good sign for both parties and a good sign moving forward. But right now, I would say immediately benefits the Democratic Party because it ups their amount of districts, but that's only because the previous older maps were GOP gerrymanders and done intentionally to harm the Democratic Party's chances at victory for many years to come. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 House election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.